We're on Unit 2 of the National Government Study Guide, Part 3. So question 19 is asking you what a party whip actually does. So what a party whip does is they ensure that members of the political party go out and actually vote on a bill. So whenever Congress actually is going to vote on a bill, the party whip ensures that political party members are there present and voting, and that they vote the way the political party wants them to vote. And at the end of the day, this is an important kind of role. It's a very prestigious job because when you do this job, you're ensuring that the party is going to get what they want. If somebody votes contrary to the party continuously, then they're not going to get the backing of the political party when they're up for re-election. So if a Democrat consistently votes a Republican vote way, they're always going for the Republican Party, then they won't get the actual political party support in the next election. So they ensure that the vote goes the way that the party leaders actually want it to go. The next question is question 20. Why is the U.S. Constitution a living document? And so we've talked about this in Unit 1. We're talking about it again. But the Constitution actually gets changed with time. So as time goes on, the Constitution can be changed through amendments, and that would be a formal way. You can also change the Constitution through the way you interpret a court ruling. And, of course, presidents can change it through executive orders. So the Constitution actually can be changed. What happens is Congress goes ahead and they propose it, and it goes to the states, or the states propose it, and it goes to the government. So there are ways for it to be changed formally, but the easiest way to actually change it is simply the court decisions and executive agreements. It's how you read, how you interpret those amendments in the court rulings. Question 21 is, what are the different ways the United States Constitution can be changed or amended? So formally, amendments, and then informally, court decisions and executive orders. Formally, now there is a time limit on amendments. You have to actually get the amendments passed and everything through in 7 years. That has not always been the case, but in recent times that is the case, so they made a change. You have a time stamp on how to get the amendments, when to get them approved. Informally is more how the Constitution is the living document. That's the one how we kind of read that amendment. So like in Tinker versus Des Moines, they read the First Amendment. The Supreme Court read it as that speech can be more than just verbal. It can be expressions. It can be non-verbal speech. The next question, 22, is who helps the president carry out their agenda? Pretty much the vice president and the first lady. And so not only do you have them, you also have like the cabinet and the executive agencies, but pretty much the vice president and the first lady go out and kind of pep up the crowd and get the people really excited about what the president's vision and agenda is for the nation. Question 23 is, what is an executive order? So an executive order is issued by the president, and it carries the full weight of the law. So this is the executive order that allowed the internment camps for the Japanese Americans with that Korematsu versus U.S. ruling. So when a president does an executive order, it carries the full weight of the law. So it's not just like the Korematsu case where you have an executive order. You have executive orders that also desegregated the United States military, like with Truman. You have executive orders that enforced the Brown ruling when it came to Little Rock 9, the little children who were trying to enroll and go to an all-white school. So you have executive orders that just go ahead and ensure that constitutional rights are being ensured, and sometimes, like with this one, the Korematsu one, being violated. Number 24 is, what is an executive agreement? So an executive agreement is between the president and other foreign nations. So it would be other leaders meeting with the president. And it's not a treaty, but it's like a gentleman's agreement. You're both agreeing, or you and these other countries are agreeing that you're going to follow this. Presidents like executive agreements because they don't have to get the Senate to approve them. So if it's a treaty, the Senate has to approve it. And sometimes the Senate gets funny about treaties. Look at World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, the United States didn't sign it because the Senate refused to sign it. And they didn't sign it for political reasons, but there were also personal reasons, like a guy felt slighted by the president, so he led people against it. So presidents sometimes like to negotiate these to avoid the whole Senate process. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is actually an executive agreement. The United States, Mexico, and Canada trade goods without taxes. So there's no tariffs, a tax on a foreign good, between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. So you'll see a lot of stuff made in Mexico. Okay, that's cool. It comes to the United States, there's no tax on it. Same thing with Canada. Same thing with our stuff in their places. So you have American-made cars being sold in Canada and in Mexico, but there's no foreign tax on it because we eliminated it with NAFTA. Question 25, in the following chart, define and give an example for each of the president's roles. So as chief executive, his job or her job is to enforce the law. So executive, that's their main job. And a good example would be like Eisenhower enforcing the integration of our public schools with the Little Rock Nine. And he did that with an executive order. The head of state is where they perform kind of ceremonial like responsibilities. So when Prince William came to the United States, he was invited by President Obama for a dinner at the White House. So this is when like foreign heads of state come here, or leaders of, like religions, like the Pope comes. It's normal and it's common for the president to hold a dinner and to hold a party to celebrate their arrival. Legislative leader is where you sign bills and the laws. So the president, this is another one of his big jobs, or her big job, is to actually sign all those bills that are sent to him from Congress into law. So Bill Clinton, he signed NAFTA, that executive agreement, into law. So he did it. He signed it into law. Any law, like universal health care, Congress sent that to President Obama. He signed that into law. Economic leader is it ensures that the budget is followed and helps with the economy. So this is that economic guardian, economic leader. So President Obama, one of his initiatives was announcing that minimum wage needed to go up, and he said he wanted to see a $15 wage in some of the cities. And some of those cities is because, like, when you look at Seattle and you look at New York City, you're looking at a very high cost of living, and so minimum wage is meant to give you enough money to live in the city. Okay. Commander-in-chief is where the president head of the military, so they head up the military. So this would be like the first President Bush sending in soldiers to Iraq to protect the people of Kuwait. So we sent people to Kuwait to push the Iraqis out, and that was him acting as commander-in-chief. The party leader is where they campaign for their political party members. So if you're a Democrat president, you're supposed to go out there and you're supposed to campaign for other Democrats. So President Obama was a sitting president, but in 2016, he campaigned for Hillary Clinton. President Trump is doing the same thing for Republicans right now. He does do endorsements, and he'll do a commercial for someone, or he'll go appear and help out with raising funds. The party leader job doesn't ever end, even when they quit being president. So former President Obama, former President Clinton, former President Bush, they still are serving this role for their party. So former President Clinton goes out on the campaign trail for other Democrats. President Bush, former President Bush, he just doesn't do it as often. Okay. Chief diplomat is where they act as a foreign negotiator. So this is like, I gave you the example in the mini lessons of Jimmy Carter negotiating with Egypt and Israel to agree to what we call the Camp David Accords. And that was the agreement that really brought peace to the Middle East for some time. So Egypt and Israel agreed that they would not fight any more wars with each other. And that was the president acting as a diplomat, a foreign ambassador for our half, but also for all of the world. Question 26 is, what is the State of the Union, who gives it, and when? So the president is required to give it annually in January. It's in the Constitution that they must address a joint session of Congress which means the House and the Senate. So they all meet, and the president gives a speech. And in the speech, they discuss the vision, the plan for the upcoming year, and they are required to do it. Number 27 is which court interprets the U.S. Constitution and why. So the United States Supreme Court interprets the U.S. Constitution. They are the experts on the Constitution, and they have the final say on it. So when you have your case heard at the Supreme Court, that's pretty much the end of the road. Now, the court can remand it. They can send it back down to a lower court. But if they make a ruling on the case, it's a done deal. The next question, 28, is how many justices are there actually on the Supreme Court and why? There are 9. And you keep it an odd number so that when the justices actually talk about the case and they vote, there's always a winner, there's always a loser. It's either they're going to be for or they're going to be against. So there's normally today, most of the time, the court rules 5-4. So there's 5 justices that say this and 4 that say the other way. But there's always a ruling. There's always a verdict. There's always been a reach to some sort of agreement, okay? Number 29 is how long does a justice serve on the Supreme Court? Life. There's no limits, okay? As long as they're physically able to work, they work. Okay. Now, if a justice becomes physically unable, they typically excuse themselves from the bench, from the court. That's what the bench means. So you'll see justices after a while, they get older and they feel like it's time for them to retire. They might want to just, enjoy retirement. But once you get appointed, you can be on the court as long as you're physically and mentally able to be on the court. There is no term limit in the Constitution for the Supreme Court, which is why the Senate, when they approve nominees for the court, they're very, very picky on it. Number 30, which jurisdiction? So the first time a case is ever heard in any court is called original. Okay, so that's the first time it happens. Think of jurisdiction as the right to hear a case, or the right to enforce a law. When a case is under review, like it's when it's at the Supreme Court, it's on appellate jurisdiction. It's appealing. You're appealing your case to a higher court for review. When a case can only be heard at one court, one level, that's exclusive jurisdiction. So some things, when it deals with constitutional issues, it can only be heard at the Supreme Court. It can't be heard anywhere else. When a case can be heard in multiple courts, we call it concurrent. Concurrent jurisdiction is not that common. It's normally like terrorist case. So I gave you the example of the Oklahoma City bomber. Like, he was tried, convicted, and given the death sentence, but he could have also been tried at a federal level. So he was tried at a state level, but he could have been tried at a federal court. Number 31 is, why does the government discipline themselves? They pretty much do it to prevent themselves from becoming tyrannical, from becoming a tyrant. And it's really to avoid becoming King George III. So the government does a lot of censorship of themselves. They do a lot of self-check, self-regulating on their powers. So they can't do like ex post facto laws. They can't really take away your right to have a trial. There's a lot of things that they're not allowed to do. And it's all about protecting us and making certain that the government doesn't become all powerful. Number 32 is when a bill comes to the president, what are the 3 things he can do or she can do? 1, they can sign it into law. And so now it's a law. The second thing they can do is they can veto it. And that means it's not going to be a law. They can also do a pocket veto. If Congress is not in session, they send them a bill and then they go home. Okay, that means they're not in session. The president can take no action on it. And if the president takes no action, we call that a pocket veto. So he doesn't sign it in the law. He doesn't sign a veto. He doesn't do anything to it. It just doesn't become a law. So this is the power of the president as a lawmaker, as a legislative leader.